Optimus Prime and Megatron are best known as sworn enemies, but in Transformers 1, they were once friends, bonded like brothers, who changed the fate of Cybertron forever. Hi, my name is Zach, and I started this YouTube channel because I cannot watch a movie without having to talk about it afterwards. If you feel the same way, you're in the right place. Consider joining us and hitting that subscribe button. With that in mind, put your comments down below. What did you think of Transformers 1? Have you been waiting for this Transformers movie your entire life like many other people out there? Or are you someone who's not that familiar with the Transformers? Because for me, that was the case. I have never really been a Transformers kid or Transformers guy. My brother was really into the Transformers when he was younger, so I've definitely seen some of the original cartoons, some other cartoons out there, but mainly my casual viewing of the Transformers comes from the Michael Bay films. So it's not a great start for getting into the Transformers, except for that first film. I still like that first film quite a bit. So going into Transformers 1, first of all, going into the trailer for Transformers 1, I had no interest whatsoever in this movie. I thought the trailer just made it look like a kid's show on Netflix that might have been rejected and put out into theaters to try to make a quick buck on it. Basically, I just didn't feel like this movie was going to be for me. But then Paramount made the brilliant decision of having an early fan screening last week for this movie, and everybody just started to rave and praise about this movie. A lot of people that I watched, that I listened to critically, were giving this movie a lot of props. So naturally, the curiosity got to me, and I had to go check this movie out. So let's talk about what works about Transformers 1. Because honestly, as saying before, going into this movie, not really expecting much from that trailer, and then hearing all the word of mouth, there was a lot of good in Transformers 1. First of all, this is an origin story. This is an origin story for Optimus Prime and Megatron. At this point in their lives, they're minors, they're oppressed, working on Cybertron. Their names are Orion Pax and D-16. And one thing that I think this film did the best at, and what it needed to do the best at for sure, is showing the relationship and the friendship between Optimus Prime and Megatron at this point in their lives. Respectively voice casted by Chris Hemsworth and Bryan Tyree Henry. And the relationship that the film develops between the two in the first half of the film, I thought was very effective, especially when you could tell where it was going and how it was going to end up with these best friends at the beginning of the film being sworn enemies at the end. They make their relationship endearing. They do give this brotherly bond to them and a lot of respect between the two that you just kind of like seeing them together at the beginning of the film. Optimus Prime is already kind of a leader, and Megatron is always kind of following in his steps, sometimes very reluctantly, but you can tell the dynamic. It's set up very well that when the tragedy of this friendship breaks up, the film does a really effective job of having you feel that. And going on to what also works in this movie is that fracture in the friendship, because you know it's going there from the beginning of the film, because Optimus Prime and Megatron, they have to become enemies. And when the moment happens in the film where Optimus Prime and Megatron, they have separate ideologies of how to deal with a problem that they've discovered on Cybertron, and you can see how Optimus Prime has taken this optimistic perspective of the situation, and Megatron is falling more to the dark side of how he wants to deal with the situation. It's very Obi-Wan and Anakin in the way that the storytelling is told. But when it comes to Megatron in particular, when it comes to his villain arc, I thought the film did a really effective job of showing you both sides, but specifically with Megatron, you can really see how this betrayal that they discover on Cybertron really does affect his character down to his beliefs and his value. And it does what a lot of great movies and stories do with their villains, where you can see the villain's perspective, not so much that you're rooting for the villain to get what they want from their perspective, but you can see how they got there. You can see why they view themselves as the hero of the story, of this is what needs to happen and needs to get done. And I feel like they did that very effectively with Megatron. I understood the villainy of Megatron more than I ever have in any other Transformers thing that I have viewed up until this point in my life. On the flip side, you can see where Optimus Prime is coming from as well. And the situation, they're very smart in not making it so black and white. You can see where both sides could be correct in what they are saying and what they believe. It just happens to have driven a wedge through their friendship. And the tragedy of that was actually pretty effective. On top of that, I really liked the characters in this film, and I also liked how they made Cybertron itself a character in this film, because Cybertron, it's not really a planet that's been explored, a place that we have explored in the previous Transformers films. They've always been taking place on Earth, and Cybertron is like this thing that needs to be saved or rescued, but we never really spend that much time on. This entire movie is entirely set on Cybertron. You get to know the society, the civilians in it, and the film also does a very good job, especially in its like hour-and-a-half runtime, of showing you the lore and explaining the history behind Cybertron. Which, of course, is where we meet our 4 leads. We've got Megatron, Optimus Prime, Aaliyah, and Bumblebee, or as he likes to refer to himself in this movie quite a lot, Badassatron. And I thought that this ensemble of characters going on this adventure on Cybertron and uncovering this secret of what's really happening on their planet, I thought that this was a really great group of characters to follow. They all had personality. They all had some great dynamics and camaraderie with each other. And in the case of Keegan-Michael Key as Bumblebee, now this was a character in the trailer where I thought the humor fell completely flat almost every time and just came across as just aimed at a younger audience and wasn't really humor that was made for me. It kind of felt like it was trying to be humor like Into the Spider-Verse, but it was just kind of missing the mark. In the context of the film, I really enjoyed this character, and I really enjoyed the humor behind the character. I think in the context of the film, of what this character was and who he is and what he had gone through, the humor made a lot more sense, and in that way, the humor was a lot funnier in the theater than it was watching it on that pretty terrible trailer. I also just think that this film sets a really great foundation for what I assume is going to be a trilogy to go forward, because by the time this movie was over, I was like, all right, everything feels set up for the next chapter, and I'm ready to see that next chapter. But before we get there, let's talk about some of the things that didn't really work for me in this movie. And a lot of the things that didn't really work for me are mostly just preference things. Like the first act of this movie, it did kind of feel like how I was worrying it was going to feel when the trailers came out. It does feel a little bit aimed at a younger audience, not so much for me. It's not that anything in the first act is necessarily bad. It's just more cutesy. It's just more kid-friendly. And it does just kind of come across as if you're watching maybe the first episode in a new Transformers animated series. As the film goes on, I do feel like it picked up steam and got better. And once again, as it told the story of Megatron and Optimus Prime, I thought they did a really good job establishing those characters and their origins. It just took me maybe 20-25 minutes to start to really get into the film. On top of that, this is definitely a movie made for Transformers fans who have been lifelong Transformers fans. And in that way, I do feel like in the short runtime of this film, an hour and a half, it does try to jam-pack it with a lot of Transformers lore to the point that I don't fully get everything about Cybertron, about what was fully going on with it. In my first viewing, there's definitely a lot of deep cuts I feel in here. There's some characters, there's some villains that are kind of introduced. Then they kind of get dropped, I think, halfway through the film. And I'm sure that they're going to come back in the sequel. But as someone who's not a huge Transformers fan, I didn't fully get what those villains were. And lastly, this is a kid and family movie at the core of it. As much as I do think the tragic story of these friends becoming villains was definitely the strongest and best part of the film, and was also the hook and the most captivating, this movie's also really predictable. From the first scene, I got who the villain was, where the plot was going, what the big reveal was going to be. And that's only because I'm 25 and I've seen this type of movie many times, whereas the audience who this is strictly aimed for, which is probably kids under the age of 13, this will probably be some of their first times experiencing this type of story. So I can forgive the movie for that. But for someone who's seen a lot of movies, and for someone like you watching who may have seen a lot of movies and is around my age, the movie's pretty predictable. There's not going to be that many oh my gosh moments happening in this one. But like I said, I'm not really going to fault the movie too much for that. That was just my experience with it. But what I will say is there was some language and some cursing in this movie that I was not expecting. That's not for a younger audience. So they definitely had an older audience still in mind when they made this film. In the end, for a movie that I had no interest watching, that I was pretty sure I was just going to skip right over for the entire year, by the end of the running time, it won me over. I liked the characters. I think the story and the foundation of these friends turned enemies was told very, very well, to the point that now they have this establishment to go into parts 2 and part 3, and they have gotten me to the point where I want to see part 2 and part 3. I'm not going to act like a lot of people are saying that this is the best Transformers movie ever, because like I said, for me, my preference, I'm probably not going to put this one on all too often over like Bumblebee or even the first Michael Bay Transformers, but as far as a movie goes, and just a time for kids and family to go into the theater, or just Transformers fans, I guess, to check it out, it is definitely a solid, recommendable film. I cannot believe I am saying that. I never thought I would have said that after watching that first trailer, but hey, this is just a testament. Sometimes trailers can be a total misrepresentative of what the movie is, because this movie was pretty good. I enjoyed it. What are your thoughts on Transformers 1? Share them with me down in the comments section below. You can check out more content and playlists right over there. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't just watch movies, talk movies. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.